In the 10th century in India, they'd already found the sounds and frequencies that heal specific organs. In the 10th century. So we know that sound can be used to blast cancer cells. We know that it can be used, in some sort of levitation. We don't know what was going on in some of these ancient sites, but I think sound has a lot to do with it.
Today we have an extremely special episode of the Ancient Futurist Podcast, and I'm so stoked to welcome Carl Hayden Smith to the pod. Carl is a researcher, a consciousness explorer, a technologist whose work lives at the intersection of human consciousness, perception, and advanced tech. And he's the director at Noonautics, founder of the Museum of Consciousness, which we'll talk about, and co-founder of the Psychedelics Nexus, and an associate professor of media at the University of East London. His research centers on how both biological and technological tools can be used to study and modify consciousness, and he's developing a framework surrounding this called Hyper-Humanism, which reframes technology as a catalyst for developing our own innate human abilities. And he's also a leading voice in context engineering, helping shape more effective environments for psychedelic research. Carl's also spent the last 8 years as a participant in Imperial College London's groundbreaking DMT research, undergoing all 3 phases, including EEG, fMRI, and extended state DMT, or DMTx, where he became the first person, so patient 0, to complete all 5 doses in the pilot phase. And he's also raised over £10 million in research funding, giving over 300 talks in 40 countries, and published more than 50 academic papers, with interest ranging from Holotechnica and umwelt hacking to embodied cognition and sensory augmentation. So we're going to dive into some of his work, what it was like being patient 0 in DMTx, and what's been uncovered about DMT, AI's role in the psychedelic renaissance, and a whole lot more. I'm ridiculously stoked to have Carl on today. And let's just get right into it. How are you feeling, dude?
Yeah, great to be here, man. Always a big fan of your work and your production, your sound work and your podcast. And just grateful to be in your space.
Yeah, thank you, man. Likewise. You've always felt like a super kindred soul. So before we dive into some broader psychedelic talk, I wanted to jump into your work a little bit because I think it's going to really set a good foundation for the rest of this conversation. And this conversation is going to be a banger, and we both already know it. So really, really excited to dive in. So first of all, like I said, let's talk about your work. So you have a lot of reverence for the human experience, and you've expressed viewing the pull towards transhumanism as backwards, right? And so within that, you're kind of creating this framework that you call hyper-humanism, where essentially instead of outsourcing ourselves to technology as a crutch, we should utilize it to discover deeper layers of our own humanity. So let's just riff on that for a second to get this started, because it's an existentially important conversation that we're inevitably about to have to confront as we are now moving towards a very obviously bizarre technological singularity where we're going to be presented with this kind of choice, right? So tell us a little bit about hyperhumanism and what led you there, and just let us into the framework a bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's very much, I've been talking about it for about 5-6 years, but it's seemingly very, very potent now as a choice, as you say. And I think the choice is diminishing the more we see the outsource to AI, like whether you're a producer, whether you're a student, the temptations to sort of bypass your own cognition or your own creativity to just get the work done is massive. And I think that the big problem is if you haven't really got to a certain age where you've had enough analog experience and you've had to do the work as such, because there was no internet or there was no bypassing available. Now we're seeing really transhuman in effect, where we may lose our channeling ability. We may lose that divine connection to whatever it is. But my take is that consciousness is something we're receiving rather than producing in our brains. So I'm very much from the idealist school. And I think that, I notice it myself. If I'm tempted to take the shortcut, that it ruins my. It makes me feel dead inside, partly, but also you can see it becoming habit forming in the sense that if you start down that road, it leads to potentially very disastrous consequences where we can't think for ourselves, we can't hold a conversation without looking stuff up. You don't store anything in your memory anymore. And I think that this is already apparent with my students who are kind of very. It's kind of interesting to see the alphas or the Gen Zers very much realizing this, and also realizing that there's an opportunity to rebel against it. So a lot of them are, in some ways, unfortunately, sort of trying to sort of avoid AI, and I think that it's difficult because even Google search now is AI driven. A lot of AI has been hidden from sight. Wasn't so much in your face, but even in music production, a lot of AI tools were ready and present, ready and available in the background. But I think that it's now a lot of young people are seeing it as robbing them of their futures and not seeing it as an opportunity. So it's really about trying to navigate this new disruptive technology in a way that doesn't disrupt our humanity and doesn't turn us into robots. And if you think about what transhuman is based around, it's very much pseudoscience. They talk about uploading consciousness. We don't know what consciousness is, so how can you upload it? And this whole longevity thing, just live forever at all costs, no matter what what you end up becoming. I personally think death is not only essential but necessary, and it frames our experience here. That it'd be nice to have a longer time at an optimal time, but I think to avoid death is totally unnatural and totally missing the point of what we're here to be. And I think that we're way more than this one existence, and it's time to make sure that we learn how to die before we die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Yeah, that is definitely going to be one of the most interesting things to witness unfold as we kind of move towards this singularity, and witness how we develop new ways or methodologies of not outsourcing or of befriending the thing, like you say, in order to expand on our own innate capacities. One of the ways that I've been doing so recently that's been like extraordinarily profoundly impactful on my life is utilizing large language models like ChatGPT, particularly the newer model 4.5, which is a little just more in depth with the psychological aspects of communication, to decode my dreams and help me relate them with aspects of my subconscious and identify the symbology, oftentimes finding stuff that I have entirely missed, that when it reflects back to me, I'm like, oh my God, that's insanity. And just really kind of helping me to understand like my own subconscious symbology and the power of the subconscious to weave these metaphorical journeys that communicate really deep things that you need to be looking at, that could otherwise be entirely misinterpreted at face value or something. So when I hear you talk about hyperhumanism and using tech as an ally in that way, that's kind of the a technique that I would think of in a way that I've been doing that. And I agree, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how the whole AI thing plays out, how the whole transhumanist ideology plays out, because we're not just talking about softwares in that movement either. We're talking about some really existentially deep shit like brain-computer interfaces. And I think even just a short, like 5 years ago, when, Neuralink entered the archetypal collective consciousness and we're thinking about BCIs or brain-computer interfaces and what that's going to look like, I think the lingo that was being thrown around was we're going to be connected to the cloud. And now it's becoming this whole other thing, because if a brain-computer interface can connect you to AI directly and to language models and similar forms of AI, now we're talking about a whole different thing than we were already talking about with connected to the cloud, right? As kind of what was entering our awareness. And so that's going to be really crazy to play out again, because we're talking about like physical merger with stuff too, not just ways that we're like leveraging technology to take our own tasks away or
Mm,
outsource our own tasks or our critical thinking skills or whatever. So when we
mm,
bring the conversation there, like I said, it becomes a different thing. And you brought up uploading consciousness, and now if we're able to create an artificial neural net, right, that has all of the synapses of a brain mapped into this neural net, and then copy and paste all of the synaptic connections, the trillions of connections in our brain into that thing. What is that thing? And I think that's going to bring up an obviously existential. I'm going to say the word existential 50 times in this conversation at
mm.
least, because I think that brings up a literally existential question. And then we can start asking ourselves on even deeper levels, like, okay, what is consciousness? Right now we have, the hard problem where we can't truly define it. But then if we're creating these golem-like things, like what does that really mean for humanity? And then of course there's going to be very bizarre arguments about like, does it have rights? Does this and that, like all those things get spun. And then
Yeah.
yeah, we're entering a really strange time with all of that. And I wanted to talk to you about your, kind of one of the motions that you're putting into play as far as developing out the framework of hyperhumanism. You were calling Holotechnica, where you're kind of combining these endo technologies with these external technologies. So tell us a little bit about that and where your head's at on that and how you've been utilizing or designing things.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you start to really look at all the different ways that we can modulate consciousness. You've got the endo technologies, which are really the domain of hyperhumanism. So it's the breath work, it's the darkness, it's the fasting, it's all the foundational stuff that you can do, which is, when I first went into doing psychedelic research, the first one was getting paid to take LSD and just do my normal work for 3 days in hospital. And it was like, finally, the circle has come fully round, and now I'm getting paid to trip with nurses administering liquid LSD, making sure to take every drop now. That was profound. But what was more profound was the hour-long holotropic breathwork session that was the base, sort of the comparison, and that was endo technology. It was, there was a soundtrack with it, but the fact that it was my own supply that I was getting high on was a game changer for me, way more powerful than the acid. And so really it's when you start looking at these different stacks. So maybe you start with some breath work, then you do a meditation, then you do some mushrooms, then you come out and do a bit of VR, then you go and do something cardiovascular, then you go snorkeling. It's like it's combining those endo technologies with the exo technology. So that's anything external that's a technology that you can't develop yourself. And then you've obviously got all the traditional psychedelics and entheogens and all the things that we know and love. But there's certain parts of the world that will never touch a psychedelic because they don't like the loss of control, and they don't like the legality problem, and that affects a lot of people's trips. Even if you're tripping somewhere relatively peaceful, that fear of getting busted at any moment. So to be able to put on a cyberdelic where we're not trying to replace the psychedelic effects, but we're literally creating new tools in the toolbox. So for me, the stacking it's very much around citizen science. Like, what are the perfect stacks? What do we really need to understand is it's very, very hard to scale psychedelics because everyone's so different. So can we use AI to help, measure people's differences? How do we use sentiment analysis? How do we use sensors? How do we use all these things to really enhance our ability to move from an altered state, which is kind of cheap in some ways, to an altered trait, which is earned. So when you're doing these fastings and your body set as much as your mindset, and it's very much about this idea of context engineering. How do we really ensure that people are optimized, personalized medicine, really? And some people will go on a very nice journey with just sound, and not need anything else, which is why I created the Museum of Consciousness. So all of my projects are looking at different modalities for getting up to the top of the mountain. And I think there's very many ways up the mountain, but the view's the same at the top.
Right. Yeah. I really, really enjoy the concept of altered states versus altered traits. And I think that's another, here we go, existential conversation that needs to be had. And it's just inevitably going to continue to develop as psychedelic renaissance continues to just infiltrate culture. And as we just collectively enter this kind of simultaneous emergence of AI and the psychedelic renaissance, and learn how to navigate the exact things that we're talking about as it pertains to transhumanism versus hyperhumanism and outsourcing versus expanding and all the things. So I really love whenever you start talking about altered traits versus altered states. So my understanding is, I mean, in your view, can Holotechnica help to implement or rather concrete these altered traits out of altered states? Is that kind of where your head's at on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book titled Altered Traits, and their focus is master meditators that have spent 30 years, reorganizing their frontal lobes, basically. And, taxi drivers, for instance, in London had to learn not just every road, but even the bends in the road. So they had what was called the knowledge. And again, they're massively earning that change, that very basic change to their physiology. So I think that there's definitely a lot to be said for not spending 30 years in a cave, especially at this time. We only live for 1,000 months. That's 83 years. And we think we own things. We think we own the land. It's completely absurd. My record collection, for instance, I've got 10,000 records just on my left here. And, I'm the ephemeral one in the room. The records will still be here when I'm gone. So I think it's very much around, if you have 30 years and you've got the capacity to spend that in a cave doing darkness or whatever it is, then that may be enough to achieve an altered trait. But for the kind of audience that I'm appealing to, it's they don't have that time, and therefore there may be clever bridges, clever combinations that won't work for everyone. I don't think there is such a thing as a magic bullet, apart from maybe 5-MeO DMT. But you get my point. I think if you want something to last, you have to put in the work, and you have to. It's all about doing the work. I see a lot of these studies happening, these clinical studies with facilitators that haven't even done the medicine that they're facilitating, which for me is morally questionable.
Yeah.
But we don't want to get into those sort of political questions. But I think that it's very much about, are you experienced?
Right. Yeah, 100%. I want to talk a little bit about sound and music, because you mentioned it just now, and obviously we both know that sound and music hold incredible power in modulating these altered states and in impacting you when you're in that state. And we're also kind of collectively remembering just how deeper than just entertainment that music goes. So do you have any specific views you'd want people to understand about sound and psychedelics or cyberdelics? And you can also feel free to talk about the Museum of Consciousness in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I started the museum 5 years ago now at Oxford University, really looking at how sound is being kind of abused pretty regularly by how we're listening to it through channels like Spotify, listening to SoundCloud, very much stripped back ghost shells of those tracks. You're not getting the full dynamic range, the emotions being stripped away. So it's not as the artist would have intended you to listen to it. And I think that we've lost that art of deep listening. So, during the pandemic, it was very abundant that we were visually overloaded. A lot of us just staring all day at ourselves on Zoom in that very narcissistic, unnatural gaze. So how to correct that? And I immediately was like, I've always been drawn to sound. As for me, it's the ultimate art form. It's the one that's immediate in its effects. It's a context engineer. It can pull you out of one context and put you in another. Back on the dance floor with your first date, just because that one track comes back on again. So I think it's just super powerful and super abused as a modality. So I'm very much looking to artists, and you don't have to be a musician. It's anything to do with sound. So it could be spoken word, it can be trip reports, it can be a ghost story, anything that really shifts consciousness in 20 minutes. That's the challenge to the artist. And we've got about 100 artists now in the museum, ranging from the very famous people like John Hopkins or Orbital, or all of these 90s heroes of mine. So a lot of electronic artists. I'd love you to feature as well. But I think the key thing is, does it work across culture, across gender, and across age? Is it something powerful enough to be worthy of a museum? Of course, all sound changes consciousness, but we're really looking for the timeless transmissions that just hit every time. A lot of the other really fascinating thing about sound is that it wears out, right? If you over listen to a track, you kind of kill it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, and then you can't listen to it anymore, or you have to put it in a hard drive and not look at the hard drive for 2 years, and then it comes back to life. But it's very much a special thing that you need new material all the time. It's like being nourished, right? And I'm
Yeah.
constantly I constantly work, and I constantly listen to music. And so one of our artists from India, Tritha, she's an incredible musician, but she also says in the 10th century in India, they'd already found the sounds and frequencies that heal specific organs in the 10th century.
Mm.
So we know that sound can be used to blast cancer cells. We know that it can be used, in some sort of levitation. We don't know what was going on in some of these ancient sites, but I think sound has a lot to do with it. So the first track we ever made with Tom Middleton from Global Communication and discoverer of Aphex Twin, was in the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, and it was only because of my record collection that I ever got that invite. So he came around my house, and I was like, what can I play this amazing ambient artist? What would he vibe with that he may have not heard before? So I played him all this Italian library music from the late 60s, early 70s, and these records are ungoogleable. So sure enough, a week later, he phones me up and says, "Carl, do you want to come in the Great Pyramid and do sound experiments?" I was like, "I'm there." So sure enough, that's our first ever track, and something that we hope to release soon enough. But it blows people's minds, that stuff, because you've got effectively the King's Chamber embedded in that track. So you know about impulse responses. So impulse response is when you're capturing the resonance of the space, and then you can place your track in that same space. So it's a bit like, time travel, space travel, whatever you name it. But I'm just amazed by all the innovations of sound, where, one of our artists is looking at the sound of internal organs, all the things that we think we are unmeasurable or can't be assessed. That's kind of where we're going with a museum. So what we eventually want to do is build a sound hospital, so that you go to the doctor for a prescription of sound rather than a prescription of not so great pharmaceutical drugs. And that's really why I'm in this phase of like building a platform for artists, and doing the science. So how do we measure the effects of sound? And there's many ways. The Germans are some of the experts in that space. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's really to correct what I think is a terrible crime, which is that we don't listen anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, dude. Man, I love everything that you just said. First off, the impulse response thing is really great and hits home for me. I've done the same thing at numerous other sacred sites. I haven't made it to the Great Pyramid, but yeah, exactly as you said is how I describe it to people as well. You're capturing quite literally the physical essence of the place. Every bit of that reverb is physically tracing the environment that it's being recorded in, and then you're imbuing your record with that, which is amazing. And yeah, to your point about just the power of sound, it's quite literally kind of textbook definition of magic. It's like this invisible force that has the power to have profound instantaneous effects on large sums of people, on one person, like all at the same time. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm pretty biased, obviously, into this whole kind of ancient future vibe that I produce, as far as crossing cultural boundaries. Like you said, like does it feel timeless, or does it work across cultures? And I think, not only myself, that's certainly the type of music that I try to produce, obviously, to anybody who listens to my music. But I think there's, a wave of that desire of using music in that way, where it can become this kind of universal earth language that, transports you. And that's the other power of music, is when you close your eyes, you can be instantaneously transported to another place, another time, another planet if you want, and it's so great. So yeah, I'm stoked to check out the Museum of Consciousness, and yeah, really cool. I wanted to talk to you too, while we're on this tip, about just the technology and Holotechnica, hyperhumanism kind of perspective about transcranial stimulation and like where we're at with that. I heard you mention it before in the context of some sleep technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's more of a transhuman technology, but it's something that is being used to enable lucid dreamers to lucid dream on demand. It's called Luma, from Prophetic. It's not out yet, but it's going to retail at about 2000 US. And of course, now if we look at that one, that one piece of kit from a transhuman versus a hyperhuman lens, it's a great example because hyperhumanism do the work, right? Learn how to lucid dream. It takes time. It's a practice. You do reality testing. You like look at your hand every hour during waking life. Am I dreaming? 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 Eventually you'll start mimicking that in a dream, and then you realize, shit, one finger's a bit long, or you haven't rendered your hand properly in the dream world. So you'll suddenly realize, oh my god, I actually am dreaming. And there's I'm simplifying, but that's the point, right? That hyperhumanism tends to be something that you do yourself, endogenous as an endo technology. Whereas now we have this device, which if it does work, and we still don't know, but it comes from a long history of these sort of transcranial stimulation devices, starting I think with passenger helmet, which was to it was again a materialist take on out of body experiences, sensing presence behind, and they were able to mimic both an out of body experience and a sensation of something behind. And therefore it was like, yeah, it's just your brain. It's just your brain doing it, and I can prove it because I've built this helmet. But the same technology, when you're in REM, if you supply a small amount of transcranial stimulation to the left or the right angular gyrus, you're actually able to switch on lucid dreaming, supposedly. And of course, that's a transhumanist vision, because one of the only places where we're free of work is dreaming and sleeping. But I can imagine a very dystopian and sort of scenario that I'm an academic. I never get a chance. There's not enough hours in the day to read all the papers I'm meant to read. So maybe I scan the text before going in and then read the actual paper in the dream, so there'll be no sacred space. And also, I imagine what would a scenario be if the new economy is actually not based around who's made the best film or the best track. It's like who's dreamt the best film or the best track,
Right.
you know what I mean? So it's like, and also we're likely to see, and I know the Japanese are way ahead of this, is dream recording. So imagine a combination of, I don't know if you've ever seen that amazing film, I think it was the early 90s, Strange Days, where they'd cracked this dream recording, and basically people, all they did was they went to sleep, they dreamt, they would wake up, review their dreams, go back to sleep, and again it's this hikikomori, this kind of escape the human velocity, sidetrack the human experience by just living inside your dreams. So I think that it's possible. Whether it's optimal or not is another matter. So, but watch this space. Let's see whether that device is successful. I know you can pre-order it for $100, I believe, on their website. But it's another example of this choice: outsource or do the work. And the question is, if you outsource once, does that atrophy the ability for you to ever get there yourself, or does it actually create, and what would be a hyperhuman take? You've had the lucid dream. You may never have had a lucid dream. A lot of people only have one in their lives and waste it, like on something daft when they could be flying or whatever. But a bit like those experiences where when VR first came out, the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, one of their experiments was to put on the headset, and then you're not looking into a game environment, you're looking through two webcams, and the webcams are behind you. And so immediately you have this out of body experience because you're looking at yourself and you're like, you can't compute. So your body goes out of body. And then I've spoken to David Luke a lot about this. It's like a faux or a fake out of body experience. But would that, because you create that neural network in the brain, does that mean you're more likely to experience out of body experiences naturally, or does it actually atrophy? So it's really this, as McLuhan says, every technology is both gives you something, but it also, it amplifies, but it also amputates.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, can outsourcing once kind of set some sort of neurobiological precedent to make it easier endogenously in the future?
Exactly.
That's a really interesting question. And yeah, circling back what you were saying on the dreams, I just want to circle back to the GPT dream interpreter thing that I was talking about, and just really stress how actually impactful it's been on unpacking tangible things in my life over the last, I've been doing it for about 2 months now. And just a quick, won't spend long on this, but just a quick little synopsis of what people can do, because you can start doing this today, is rename a chat GPT chat dream journal, and I like to put a little emoji before it so that I can always see it in the sidebar. And every day, just when you just give it as much of the detail as you can recollect, and not only is it serving the incentive for you to actually dream journal, which is something we should all be doing anyway, and was a massive part of life in so many non-Western cultures and in so many traditions, right? Like, we've had the importance of our dreams kind of robbed from our psyches. And I think that, man, like, when we can really dive in and allow that natural interface with our subconscious to become a big part of our lives, we can figure out a lot of shit a lot faster. And it also prevents us from like misinterpreting things that we might inherently perceive to be like nightmarish or whatever, and to decode the subconscious lingo that is actually occurring between yourself and your conscious mind and unconscious. And man, it can just solve so many things. So I would say, stay in the same chat, and what will happen over time is GPT will begin to draw and weave threads between your dream patterns, and synthesize these patterns and talk to you. And anyway, it's just, I really wanted to share that because it's been that profound for me, like just really, really crazy shit. And brings me to the next thing that I was going to say, right, is like,
Can I just jump in on that, because
of
it's such an
course.
interesting thing. I've been journaling for like God, my whole life really, since I was 15, and it's like you say, it's such an amazing tool for jumping out of point of view and going into field of view, just
Hmm.
like the astronauts. You suddenly get this superpower where you've got the trace, because most of us don't keep a record. And of course, there's benefits to doing it and there's disadvantages to doing it. But for me, because I've journaled for so long and journaled, many different with many different sort of modalities again. So all my ideation is handwritten, and again, that's a hyperhuman technology, handwriting. Don't lose it,
Hmm.
because as soon as you stop using your hand to ideate or to record your ideas, I think that there's a huge part of the brain that's gone, that you're not activating. And so I've got a Word document that's 2.5 million words long, which is like what I've done, like in terms of the content, what I did. And then the context is all captured with photography and video. So that's the mood, that's the emotion. And then the concepts is the ideation, which is like the channeling. So I've got that all handwritten, thousands of notebooks, and it's like I'm a living archive. But what you really realize is that you're not going in a linear progression. You're going in a spiral, right?
Hmm.
In the same way that we're spiraling through space on this mad rock, that's called planet Earth. We're also in that spiral, and like you keep going back to similar things until you resolve them somehow. So I think
Yeah.
that's really, when we're always just in this cult of productivity, like you must get the next thing done, you must produce or die. It's like human doing is taken over, and human being is being left far behind. And I think
Hmm.
how do we get back into a balance there? where we realize that, unless we get into that nature connection, into that pure state of just pure consciousness, we'll be on our deathbeds going, what happened?
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah. It's this. We're approaching the thing. We're approaching the singularity, dude. As we get further into this conversation, I feel like we haven't even really begun yet. It's yeah. There's so many points that we've already kind of covered that are literally, here's number 3, existential, like to the max. It's the only word that can be used to describe it as we move into this future where we're presented with this choice of like outsourcing, like avoiding entirely, which my personal philosophy will tell me that that's not the move either, or hybridizing a model where it's being used as an extension of our own capacity, like your hyperhumanism philosophy, right? And so what other roles do you think AI is going to play in the realm of like holotechnica and hyperhumanism?
Well, I really think it's again coming back to that point around personalization. I think that I've just got a Hume health device. I don't know if you've seen it. The scales where you pull up the thing, and then it gives you a breakdown of every single part of the body. Like you've got more fat on this arm than this arm. It's probably like very
Whoa.
very rough in terms of its depiction. But I think the quantified self thing. Knowing how much sleep you're getting, knowing how much quality sleep you're getting, I've had very weird encounters with people that can just read me, like I'm media, like I'm readable. And it seems like there's so much information that we're not aware of ourselves, which is like, what social media started to like sort of make visible is like, yeah, Facebook knows me better than my mum knows me in 2D. What if, you start using Oculus and you start to give away your 3D data to Meta, then Meta will know you better than you know yourself and be able to predict what you're going to do next.
Hmm.
So we are like these kind of very predictable, um, when we're predictable, and I think that when it comes to AI, I think it's like we need to really understand the opportunity to have an assistant, have something that will give us advice, and that doesn't atrophy our channeling ability, but just gives us something that is a bit like a quantified self. If you're about to have that extra donut or that extra thing and it just sets an alarm, your cholesterol's going to do this or whatever. I think that having that insider information, also around like how something is affecting you in terms of a stack or a song, some sort of, and I think that there's dangers with quantifying everything as well. Like, that's why it's so good to go to Egypt or India, because in the West, we kind of know cause and effect. We kind of know what's going to happen if we continue to do this. But you go to India and there's like a billion stories exploding everywhere around you and you can't quantify any of it. So for me, that's kind of really refreshing to not be able to quantify. So I think having an AI that isn't so focused on intelligence, but something that's focused on wisdom, and a lot
Hmm.
of people are now like there's an AI thoth, like the mercurial. So it's like, how do we really get the endogenous? And this, I've looked at recent experiments or recent examples where, it's people protecting their languages that are being lost, or it's like preserving customs. It is just the next disruptive technology. People have got massively confused between computing and consciousness. I think there is a massive difference. What we've got currently is not going to result in sentience, even though it's mimicking very cleverly what looks like sentience, and people are losing their shit. And it's like Alania says, it's like it's not so much the technology that will drive us insane, but our perception of the technology. So how can AI help us correct that perception, that kind of cognitive dissonance? I think that's a really interesting project.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So before we move on to some deep psychedelic talk here, I just want to ask you like about the future. So obviously we're in this kind of awkward awakening phase collectively where the majority of us are still waking up to what's possible in these altered states, much less the combination of altered states with all of this technology that we're talking about. So in a world where we have maturely adopted psychedelics with care. What does civilization begin to look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I was at Borderland, which is like the Danish Bern or now the Swedish Bern, and there was a Swedish professor of psychology there, and he did a talk, and it was like his vision was to get everyone into psychedelic like camps, like immediately, like everyone in society, get them all into these camps, force feed them psychedelics. And I was like, are you insane? Like, of course, like this is going to lead to a disaster because, a lot of people can't tolerate cannabis, let alone hardcore psychedelics. So I think for me, it's really, a society that's well adjusted is a society that has access to the tools, that has access to education, that knows what this is likely to do to you if you adopt it as a modality. So I think that some people will just do brilliantly with incredibly curated sound as a way of recharging and getting lasting behavioral change. But we don't deeply listen. That's the problem. And we don't get access to analog recorded vinyl so much anymore. It's all like digital, and it's a bastardized, way of listening. So I think even knowing that you're not listening to the sound as it actually is, you're listening to a ghost of the sound. So for me, as I said, it's about knowing yourself through these experiments, through not being like brainwashed into thinking that you shouldn't explore your consciousness. But, most of it's about knowing what not to do rather than what to do. And I think that's what we do. As you get older, you start realizing, oh, I don't need, that's not something that vibes with me. It might vibe with other people, but for me, it's a really a world where people have got access to these different tools, but also a world where people kind of get, that these things are really add-ons. That you kind of you're this divine being already without anything, and your body's more intelligent than you are. I think that's the big basis of hyperhumanism. It's like, let's build on what we don't know. We don't know what we are. We think we know we're these discrete human beings, but actually we're half bacteria, half human, and we're covered in fungi. So we're like three queendoms or three kingdoms, and that means we're an interbeing. So like, it's about behaving like that and realizing that you're in an ecology, a nested ecology, and that you're dependent on all these things that much of our behavior destroys. So it's really about that. It's about being an interbeing and honoring everything that exists, and know that it's all consciousness, even though you may dismiss a lot of it as not intelligent. It's not all about intelligence, and I think that's where AI takes us down a wrong path. Like, what do we have if we do suddenly enter a world like you mentioned, the singularity, where everything is done for us? What do we have left? And that's our bodies, that's our subjective experience, it's our ability to bond, it's empathy, it's compassion, it's imagination. All of those things is what we should focus on.
Yeah, 100%. As you were saying that, it was just kind of making me think of a world, right? Like if we're talking from a Holotechnica perspective, where like you can enter, such and such altered state, kind of open those synapses while immersing in a VR experience that simply, while in that state, informs you of what you are and creates this new perspective of openness and whatever. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of really cool opportunities for the really thoughtful combination, and as you call them, stacks of very specific technologies used in a very specific way with very specific altered states to form or open the doorway rather for altered traits, right? Like a new understanding that really concretes and sets in based on the combined parameters of a very carefully curated experience that's accessible to people, in order to kind of usher in this new understanding that seems kind of required if we're going to move forward without blowing ourselves up, right?
100%.
So cool, man. Well, yeah, let's start getting into some meat here. So I obviously I have to ask you, and everybody's gonna want to just hear from you, like, what was it like in the DMTx program being patient zero for for extended state DMT, obviously that has to have been an absolutely profound experience. And yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about what that was like for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, extreme is the word. I think it's it wasn't just out of context, so it was a real build up through working with Chris Timmerman and his team and all the people at Imperial. Being very lucky to get past the first hurdle, and that was basically an EEG with intravenous DMT. And I remember I was like being told off for breathing. And I was like, guys, like that's how you navigate the space. So please don't stop me breathing. And they're like, Carl, you're just doing an additional technique. And I'm like, no, 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 this is 100% needed. But I was causing motion artifacts on the EEG just because of breathing, and I was like, you just need better equipment. You can't restrict me from doing what I need to do in order to navigate this experience. But luckily, they didn't throw me out, because that could have been the end at the beginning. So I was very grateful for that. And yeah, I guess, I mean, DMTx is an extraordinary technology. It's something that I think is, again, a transhuman or a hyperhuman technique. But the experience of it is, I went through 5 different dosing sessions, and it's just the fact that you realize that you could stay in that space potentially indefinitely, and that it's a bit like electricity. Suddenly you're able to plug in and plug out of this mainframe, and that's really the profound thing in itself, just as a sort of a conceptual thing to overcome. But the actual experience is, for me, it never stabilized, and that doesn't mean it won't stabilize if you're in there for days or whatever. But it's something that is, it's almost like you're like going through these interfaces, and you're constantly going through. You're meeting all these entities. They're so intrigued by your existence that you're kind of like having to, give up. There's a give and take. I think that they're getting to experience the ontology that is human, like this thinking, feeling being, and then you're kind of interacting with this completely different ontology, this other world that is kind of not anything to do with that, But there's this psychic surgery that's happening. I had to go in every 3 weeks. It was like me and Chris joked that it's like DMT church, right? We were going to church because they drug test you before giving you drugs.
That's amazing.
It's really strict, so you're not allowed to do anything. I mean, I gave up alcohol 9 years ago now, so I mean that was never an issue. But they test you for everything else. They want to make sure that it's a clean, you're a clean subject, that it is just DMT that you're experiencing, and to just go through all those different dosing days. I mean, one was my birthday, one was my dad's birthday. I mean, there's a whole panel discussion that we put out with Graham Hancock and Andrew Gallimore and 4 of us at Imperial. So for a deep dive, definitely check that one out on YouTube. I mean, all I can say is that it gave me things, the extended state gave me things that DMT alone has never given me, and 5-MeO DMT has never given me.
Wow.
And just to give you one anecdote, and that's intriguing, that it's kind of bridging those realms. So, if I think about a good metaphor is that, we're here on, in the 3D realm, the sun is shining upon us, right? We're getting our light from the sun. And then if you're doing ayahuasca, changa, NN-DMT crystal form, you're experiencing light emit from bodies, light bodies, which is also what we talk about when we go into the astral, when you have your light body when you're asleep. It's not so much your real body that's, if there is such a thing as abduction, then it's your light body that's abducted. It's not your physical body. So you see, and then when you do 5-MeO DMT, it's like you become light itself. It's, different ways of relating to light. I think that these medicines, these entheogens open up. But imagine the scene. I'm on the 5th dose of DMTx, and I'm sitting there in the hospital wing that is Imperial. I've got DMT going intravenously into one arm. I've got bloods coming out of the other, so two cannulas, and I'm suddenly seeing at the bottom of my bed this white disc, which looks like a white hole, not a black hole, but a white hole. It's rotating, it's like moving, and I'm like, there it is. There's the unity space that I associate with 5-MeO. And then I'm sort of shuffling down my bed to try and get into this hole. Very like obviously not going to make it, but as I'm shuffling down, I can see this thing crack open, and I'm like, what the fuck? It's like an alien takeover of DMT space. And I was like, this is sinister. Like, what's going to happen? Like, is it going to go back to a duality? And of course, it was like what I've always asked in my 5-MeO trips when I'm in this non-dual whiteout, this like you as light, infinite, eternal light, is that what is beyond, what is producing this non-duality? What's producing it? You know, always asking the next thing, like not being satisfied that I'm in the non-duality, but just like what's producing the non-duality. And in this DMTx experience, I feel like I got the answer, because behind the crack, I could see there were an infinite sort of a plurality or unity of unities. Like there was just a multitude of these different types of non-duality, and for me that was a real game changer to experience something that kind of informing me. Yeah, you have your unity, your non-duality, but there are many others. Like in the same way there are many different types of existence, we have this living, dying existence, but there are multitudes of differences that may be indicating a multiverse. But who knows? It was just a game changer, and something that, you know, alongside always the light language that I'm seeing, which I see on every different type of DMT experience, always at the core of my vision. You know, I'm seeing this hieroglyphic, ancient and modern language that's made of light, that's holographic, that I can walk around. You know, like that's ever present, and I'd love to be able to sit and draw that whilst tripping, like, which I've not been able to do at Imperial because you're blindfolded, and it's much about, you know, they want to get their data. But yeah, I'm really keen to try and bring more back, a bit like what you're doing with your ChatGPT dream practice, to have something where you can stay in the state and even adjust the dose whilst you're in there. So that's the real game changer, I think, as I've mentioned to you. You know, being able to start at a very low dose, you know, to get used to the space, maybe 20, you know, start at 5 milligrams, and then you go in and you ramp it up when you're feeling a bit more comfortable. Then suddenly you see an entity that's very low res, so you think, okay, now I want to go up to 40 mil just to have this meeting, right? And then you go in there with an intention. I think, again, the hyperhuman version of DMTx for me is that you go in as a scientist, as a therapist, as a curious individual that wants to know something, that wants to have an answer. You go in with a scientific problem, and you go in there with all the tools, whether it's your sketchbook or it's your recorder or it's, you know, or it's a VR experience. Maybe you do a mixed reality experience whilst tripping on DMTx, you know. So I think that there's all these different technologies and ways of enhancing, ways of recording, but the ultimate goal is to make contact, to try and understand if these entities are more than your own archetypes, more than your own imagination, you know. Because for me, you know, I even mentioned this on the Aubrey podcast, it's like, for me, it doesn't matter. It's like, it would be a bonus if it is a parallel world. Of course, I believe there are parallel worlds anywhere. I don't really need to sort of plug into them. But I know a lot of people are really looking to this technology as a way of making contact that's reliable, that's repeatable, that we can, you know, there's that, I can't remember the name of the comedian, but he's got a DMT girlfriend, and he only gets to see her when he's on DMT. You know that guy?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Man, yeah, you just covered a lot. Also, the plurality of unities thing was really interesting to me. It just brought up it brought up some of the framework from the Law of One model and cosmology to mind, because you're talking about this plurality of unities, and then you described it as a white hole or a black hole, right? And
Yeah.
in that cosmology, the supermassive black holes at the center of any galaxy are referred to as a sub-logos, or like a co-creator, right? And so like they contain the unified information of all of the light that's been absorbed by that black hole, and then basically integrate that information into what the Law of One refers to as a new logos or a new infinity. And then on the other side of that black hole is the white hole, where that thing speaks a reality into existence based on the integrated information from the light that that black hole has consumed. That was just yeah, that just sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole mentally while you were talking about that. And yeah, let's talk about entity contact for a second, because
Yeah.
that's obviously something that is becoming more and more understood, accepted, as it is still mysterious. And as you were saying, it's almost impossible to discern sometimes, whether something is an archetypal aspect of our own conscious or unconscious mind. And then there are other times, and I've had these experiences personally, where even though I've been on that train of thought and really looking for something definitive, I'll have an experience where I'm absolutely convinced that an encounter that I have is not something that is of me, or whatever. And this is for various reasons we don't necessarily have to get into, but I guess I want to ask, like, as this phenomenon of entity contact continues to go mainstream, like, what are the cultural implications of this? I mean, it seems like it could be so many. And just again, it's like, even like 5, 10 short years ago, if you told somebody that you were having contact with an interdimensional intelligence, you're not sure what it is. You're not claiming to have the facts, but you know that you are interfacing with an intelligent entity of some sort. And this is like not a game. Often, many people, describe myself included, it feels realer than this reality that you and I are existing in this moment. So when that starts to become accepted simply as something that just fucking happens, like, what does that mean for culture? What's going to change? How do we begin to explore that? And as you were talking about, with DMTx, that technology allows for a whole new dimensionality of exploring that exact thing, because of the ability to granularly titrate and adjust dose and, blood serum level of DMT in real time. And so that's something you can't get through vaporization, or you can't even almost get quite that dialed. Obviously, it's kind of like a ready, set, aim, fire, and like
Mm.
you're in whatever space you're in, right? But with the DMTx, it seems like that's going to really provide the ability to approach it from the perspective of like initiating these sorts of encounters and then dialing them into whether it opens up higher resolution encounters, whether it opens up two-way communication, because sometimes in the DMT space you'll land somewhere and maybe you can receive this kind of communication and can't project it back, or vice versa. And so when we're able to really kind of just dial that in and allow ourselves to look at it for that means, what does that mean for fucking civilization at that point?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I think this idea of othering is again, it's something that's becoming more prevalent. I think that we need to other, we need to get out of our own way a lot of the time. We need to realize we're part of that nested ecology. In fact, I've heard some interesting theories around, people that are experiencing DMT entities, maybe just experiencing a part of themselves that's a fungal infection, or is some sort of like parasite that's inside them that they're not really aware of. But yeah, we are multitudes, and like I said, I think that we have these blinkers on, right? We don't know what we are. We're very much living in our heads. We're brains on sticks a lot of the time, walking around not realizing we're in these bodies. But you're in a larger body, like you say. I mean, it's for me a huge opportunity to understand these these realms. And I don't know, let me just grab this book. So this one just came out. I don't know if you've got a copy yet.
I haven't, but I saw it.
Yeah. So I think that, we're starting to catalog these things. We're starting to explore, the potential for these spaces to be mapped out. And, I know DMTx Nexus, the forum, before it was closed or at least shut down for new subscribers, was really looking at that labyrinth. Have you been here? I've been here, sort of getting that collective intelligence, like I'm saying, to do with the Holotechnica project, is, you know, we need to commune this stuff. We need to work together, and I think that's the beautiful thing about the psychedelic renaissance. Even though it's kind of hit the buffers in lots of senses, and especially in the commercialization, which is no bad thing, it's something that, well, at least we can talk about it. You know, I mean, I remember going to Breaking Convention, which is happening this weekend. You know, a lot of academics 10 years ago, you know, would have to create an alias, or would have to create some sort of pseudonym, because they couldn't be featuring on a paper there and still working as an academic. So things have moved on, and I think that, you know, the more we talk about possession, not just entities, but people that get possessed, you know, I think that that's something that, you know, I think that, you know, we haven't talked about dissociatives yet, but, you know, a lot of these medicines can lead to you opening yourself up to, you know, like an open door, right? Anything can come in. And of course, if you're not strong, if you don't have enough capacity to know your own sort of boundaries, and it's difficult, as based around what I've said, that we're not these discrete entities, that we may, you know, we have these egregores and these tulpas and all of these thought forms, you know, and people don't realize that, you know, you can imagine, you can create an imaginary friend, it becomes a thought form, it becomes a reality, it has its own sentience. Mm-hmm. So I think that we are very powerful if we use our imaginations, if we really, you know, in the ancient meaning of the word manifest, you know, for me it's like you can either have a 5-MeO unity experience where you become one, like with everyone, with everything, and then you can't believe you can come back from that. You know, it's incredible that every time I do it, every time I have one of those experiences, I'm like, okay, well, that's it. I've resolved the universe. It's resolved now. But then you float back into your human experience, and you're like, oh my God, like I get to live this from this perspective too. You know, so you kind of have that double consciousness. But then with you know, a lot of people that are exploring some other ways of reaching unity, I think you can also reach unity through disassociation. You're disconnecting to reconnect with the other again. And of course that can take all sorts of forms, because you're dissolving your boundary and then letting everything in, which is another way of reaching unity. And of course it's the basis of a lot of occult practice, and it's something that's sort of demonized even and frowned upon. But I think that there's huge opportunities if, again, navigated with care. Do all your research, you know, do not jump into anything without realizing there is always risk. So whenever I do any kind of psychological journey, I always have 3 things in mind, which is have an intention, ask for protection, and thirdly, let go of whatever you think you are, because that's what's keeping you here. That's what's restricting you, is this body definition or this mind definition, and we all put ourselves in boxes all the time, and yet that's the whole problem right there.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to something that you said a minute ago regarding the language that you see and continue to see on DMT, and just if you have any other kind of conclusions there, because I saw this language for the first time on the winter solstice of 2014 during a DMT experience. This is why my first album was called Solstice. No one knows that, but there you go. And it blew my fucking mind, the way that this language was constructed. When I first experienced it, the word that hit me instantly was Hebrew. And then the more I kind of looked at it, I realized how it's similar in structure and in symbols, from my experience, to like Hebrew and Sanskrit. And then this sent me down this multi-year rabbit hole of reading like xenolinguistic books and just like different, and like really trying to, and then I found numerous other alphabets that kind of have some of the characteristics of it, but not all of them, like the Khmer alphabet. And I'm just curious because, you know, kind of, it's a mystery to me, but when I'm in that state, I could understand every single symbol and character in this inherently conscious and unconscious way. And what I've kind of just logically deduced is that it seems to be some kind of primordial language of perception, whereas like you can assign meanings to things. But what have you come to any other like conclusions or went down any interesting rabbit holes regarding the language itself that you see? I'm assuming we're talking about the same phenomena.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think from what you've said, absolutely. I mean, as soon as I first experienced it very early on, you can't unexperience it. And for me, I'm getting that every single time, no matter what the dose. It's present and correct. And of course, it's something that I want to draw out. And it's very much like you. I went down a rabbit hole. I put it out to people. I mean, Alison Gray was probably the closest I've seen it represented in an artist's form. I spoke to her recently about it, and she said it was an LSD experience that triggered it for her. So that light language again is one of these demonized terms, but it's something. There's something in it, and I'm fascinated by the fact that we are experiencing these different dimensions of light, and there's an accompanying light language.
Hmm.
And then you think about what happens when you're in the dark, and maybe the darkness can help incubate DMT. We know from the Kogi tribe that that seems to be the case, that these shaman are chosen very early on, 9 or 18 years in the cave from birth, so they don't see any light until their 9th or their 18th birthday. And what kind of endogenous DMT levels have they got? That would be an interesting study to map out.
Yeah, I know we were talking about that recently and trying to put something together on that tip. And I do think that it's really important that we put some science to that study, because obviously, and I have yet to do a full-blown darkness retreat, but I have some very close friends who have, and they unanimously describe it as the most potent experience
Yeah.
of their life. And these are experienced psychonauts, like heavily experienced psychonauts. And so I've done some research into the threads, and most of it is theoretical at this point, because I haven't personally found a study that actually tests for what's going on. But what it seems could be happening is that in the absence of light for an extended period of time, your pineal gland and your circadian rhythm is altered in such a way where you no longer produce melatonin, which is a few chemical steps away from various tryptamines. And then the melatonin would then be converted into something potentially like beta carboline like alkaloids, which would be MAOIs, like similar to harmine and harmaline, and then into NN-DMT, and then ultimately 5-methoxylated into 5-MeO-DMT, and you're quite literally consuming your own supply at that point. And so this seems to be a likely culprit in my just understanding of various cultures for their initiatory experiences in some of the structures that we see that you just got back from Egypt as well, right? And so like in some of these structures that are were once thought to be a tomb and now appear not to quite be a tomb, which kind of brings us right into the next thing that I really wanted to talk about is just the darkness and your experience, because you visited a ton of these different sites. Has that thought occurred to you that some of these places could be like this initiatory darkness retreat style chamber?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, I'm fascinated by this endogenous question, endogenous DMT. We're doing a number of studies now at Noonautics related to that, to put the science to it. So working with Andrew Gallimore, working with Sidao on something interesting at the moment. So, but yeah, I mean, very, very blessed to be able to go to a lot of these sacred sites, and really to explore them acoustically as much as anything. But of course, these sites would have been in total darkness. Now, even if you go in the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber's got lighting inside. But if you're lucky and you get to hire these spaces out, and you get a nice inspector from the Ministry of Antiquities, they'll let you switch off the lights. Or in fact, the last time I was in the subterranean chamber in the in the Great Pyramid, the inspector was insistent on us switching off all the lights, which was like a godsend. I was
Nice.
like, thank you, thank you. He was trying to do it so we didn't film anything, but he actually didn't realize what a gift that was, to spend like an hour in the darkness in the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid, where you're really in the underworld. And even though these sites are all about death, the energy in there is insane. So, I think my guess is that a lot of these ancient sites were built on older sites that were very much known for their energetic qualities. And no matter how sort of thick-skulled you are, you can not sense this energy, right? It's like it's insane. So yeah, I'm massively fascinated by the mystery schools like Lucis, um, you know, these Greek inner mystery schools that, you had the outer mysteries and the inner mysteries. And we kind of know there was this 3-day initiation, which was almost certainly in darkness, almost certainly involved some psychedelics. And, it's a journey into death. It's a journey into understanding you've got a limited time here. Get on with it. Whatever you're doing, this is your reminder to get on with your mission, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, your legacy, whatever it is you want to leave behind. Because we're here for these very short lives, and the way we've structured everything, it's all built for immortality. It's all built for, this kind of illusion of permanence. And of course, change is the only permanent thing. So for me, these sites are replicas of that kind of thought form. They're reminding you to learn how to die before you die, and to utilize all these liminal spaces, whether it's a lucid dream, whether it's the hypnagogic or the hypnopompic. It's always the space in between, that's the potent space. So it's like, being mindful that that you have these abilities, if only you do the work to actually build that ability up, and do your investigations, because you have faculties, but if you don't use them, you lose them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so on that kind of architecture tip and the sacred sites, right? Like there's definitely some sort of thread between architectural visions, like in the psychedelic visionary state, and architecture across various civilizations and sacred sites. And it always brings up this insane chicken or the egg thing
Mm.
in my head, because like you look at some of these sites, you look at mosques, even you look at pyramids, all of these kinds of structures, also like South American and Central American pyramidal structures. Like I have had so many experiences, be it on psilocybin, DMT, where and I mean, this is also captured in visionary art across the spectrum of these exact architectural kind of, no buildings and constructions in that state. So obviously it brings up the internal line of questioning surrounding a chicken or the egg argument. Like, were these sites built in replication of what people were experiencing when consuming tryptamines, or is it vice versa, or are they a cultural memory of sorts embedded in our DNA, which is potentially what we're accessing when we're in these states? I'm sure, having visited all these sites, that this thought has entered your domain. So would you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great chicken and egg question. And one of my first job was actually in Iran. I was reconstructing the Palace of Darius in Persepolis, and you know, some of the sites there, like just like you say, there's such a multitude of sacred geometries. And I was very lucky to spend 7 years reconstructing ancient buildings around the world, and spending all my time listening to music whilst either out there, doing the surveys to then build everything in CAD, and but this ability to 3D model some of these spaces really does affect your dreams. It affects your trips. It's like you create memory palaces. I was reconstructing 6 Cistercian abbeys in Yorkshire, for many, many years. And, even now, 20 years later, I'm able to reanimate those structures in my mind's eye and use them as memory palaces for whatever purpose, because I've built them. But I've only built them on a screen in 2D, and yet they're writ large as 3D objects in my mind. So that's psychedelic in itself. The fact that I can put something on a screen, make it, reconstruct something that took 100 years to build and house different architectural styles, like you'd have a Romanesque nave and the Gothic choir, and realizing that you're probably the only person that's seen this thing as a whole, you know, within 6 months of building it, and it's just a real privilege to have, again, that overview effect, that ability to jump out of point of view and dive into the overview, and to see architectural styles evolve in front of your eyes, and to actually embody it because you're building it from the scratch, from the base up, so it's a highly powerful technique. I'd say get 3D modeling. I'd say to everyone out there, 3D model some amazing shit, and then you'll have a much bigger brain. A bit like when they say that if you're bilingual, you're much more likely to survive a stroke because your brain is just full of, you've got way more neural networks. So again, it's like with dreaming. I know somebody that goes to sleep and they'll have a year and a half in one night. They'll live a life for a year and a half going to sleep in that Inception style, where they'll wake up in their dream and go out and do their normal thing for a year and a half, and then they'll wake up from that life and then have another dream the next day where they dream another year and a half. So they're having like a 10-year experience in 1 week. So what's happening to their neural networks?
Yeah, on that tip, now you're dragging me into it, because now we're gonna have to get into this for a second. So on that exact tip, right, I was actually talking with Dr. Gallimore when he came on my podcast a while back about these Salvia experiences, right, where people experience these parallel timelines, mundane life existence, for what is often experienced by them as years. And these stories flood the internet. And, Dr. Gallimore and I were speaking about one in particular where a guy lived for, 8 years as this kind of mundane life. He was a Mormon in Alaska and lived for an 8-year experience in some town called Tyler, Texas. And whenever he smoked the salvia on Christmas Day in his brother's basement, he popped into the body of someone who was floating face down in the water after a wakeboarding accident. Whoa. Was pulled up on this boat by these 3 people who were the guy's best friends, but he didn't recognize them. He's like, what the fuck's going on? I just smoked salvia, whatever. And they bring him to the doctor. All this transpires. Doctor says, well, you probably have brain damage and just amnesia. You'll remember it in a few days. And then they drop him off at his apartment, tell him he's got to go to work tomorrow, and all this crazy shit. And he's living in this parallel timeline. And I've told this story before, so I won't get into all the crazy details, but I do want to give you enough context to ask the question. Is this guy experiences this whole 8 years of existence, right? And he goes through the motions and eventually accepts that he has brain damage and that his prior life with his wife and children in Alaska was bullshit. And he even drove, he says, from Texas to Utah, where he went to high school, to go see if it was the same high school. And he said everything was different there. It was this slightly different version. He said the high school was named something different, but the town name was the same. And all this crazy shit. And then so basically just goes through the motions, 8 years, and then he one day was walking out into a parking lot with a box of chicken he said he orders, and he all of a sudden felt the same sensation of falling upwards that landed him into that body that he recollected from when he smoked the salvia. And when he fell upwards, he came back into his body in his brother's basement on Christmas Day, having a seizure, peed himself, and asked people how long he was out for. He experienced 8 years, and they told him he was having a seizure for about 45 seconds, and he peed on himself, and just the whole thing. And then his wife busts in the basement, and she's like, "You're ruining Christmas," and he just had a whole 8-year experience. And so there are a bunch of these stories, and a thread that I've found that's really interesting is that oftentimes when people have, which by the way, salvia has been demonized, but the fact of the matter is that, kind of the meme became of it that the world's most potent naturally occurring hallucinogen is sold in high-grade extracts at every 7-Eleven, so America's high schoolers could line up for the worst 5 minutes of their lives. And that's basically exactly what happened. So I just do want to state that these types of experiences, which are generally considered to be fairly unpleasant, are the result of massively overdosing on salvinorin
Oh,
A.
yeah. Huge.
Massively overdosing. These extracts, 80x, 100, these things should not exist. 10x salvia is more than enough.
Mm.
And so people are just nonchalantly packing a big bong bowl full of it and then holding it in because their friend told them make sure you hold it in or whatever, and then boom, 8 years as someone else and you peed yourself and you ruined Christmas. So don't do that. But
Also,
yeah,
chew it, right? Chew it. Don't
yeah,
smoke it.
so that's the real way to do salvia is to quid the leaves in your mouth. And it's not fun because they turn into this like kind of sludge and you need to hold them in for like 30 minutes, but
Right.
that's the cost of entry.
Yeah.
It's not awful and they just taste like earth, but
Yeah.
it's you know, you hold them for a bit and it's a way smoother, gentler, loving, way more shamanic experience. You don't get the
Mm.
feeling that your very soul is like being fucked with, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, a thread that I've found across these experiences is that the people who end up in these parallel experiences assume the role, like hop into the body of someone that is having a near-death experience. There are other stories of people popping into someone's body who's in the hospital bed experiencing an overdose or having just had a heart attack or something. And so I find that just like so interesting. Salvia experience reports are something that I just can just read before bed at night and just dead sober, just read and just be so engaged because they're so fascinating to me. And like
Yeah.
it opens up a Pandora's box of questions about the multiverse, parallel timelines, or simply the ability of the human brain to concoct a brand new reality, a brand new experience of time in this nonlinear kind of, you know, cosmic cause and effect fashion that just defies all explanation. Have you heard of any of these kinds of stories?
Oh wow. I mean, yeah. I mean, outside of dreaming, I've had definitely. I mean, one interesting experience was at a Kalundi party. So when Reflex Records shut down, Kalundi, the label, took over, and there's always in some amazing part of Devon or Cornwall or in some amazing house. And yeah, one particular occasion, my friend became me. Like, and he was in the bathroom trying to wash me off. Like he was like splashing his face.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I think that it is like you say, we don't know what we are, we don't know what abilities we have, and I think that whether it's a hyperhuman technique or a psychedelic or something that will enable these things to be understood more readily, more repeatable, more scientific. Until then, I think that they're just these sort of freak experiences that we can't
Yeah.
map out in a normal sense. But I don't. That's why I try not to believe anything. I'm always open,
Uh,
to any possibility because I just think you're just doing yourself a misservice if you're a materialist or if you're just adamant that it's all brain activity or it's like there's no room for any magic. I find that very impoverished.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That particular line of thinking and not believing anything, right, I guess is like what makes the salvia ones so interesting. They're just so fun to think about. There's so many different it's just so unlike any other psychedelic experience reports, right, that you can find and it's like experienced as so real. This guy was talking about how he like joined a band and shit and like
Yeah.
was like playing in a band during this alternate. It was crazy, dude. But yeah, you mentioned something about a stroke a while back. I think in the context of being bilingual. But I heard you mention in one of the talks that I listened to about how DMT might end up on ambulances because they're finding that you're more likely to survive a heart attack or a stroke. Can you tell us briefly about that real quick?
Yeah, so this all comes from Eddie Fresca's work, and Eddie Fresca's really looked into things like hypoxia. So when you're having a stroke, or you're having some sort of issue with your heart where you're being oxygen deprived, if you do receive DMT during that experience, so in the ambulance potentially on the way to the hospital, then you're much more likely to be neuroprotected and regenerative, to have something protect you whilst you're in that state, so that you're more likely to survive a stroke unscathed and more likely to come out of a heart attack. So check out Eddie Fresca's work. He's criminally underfunded as a DMT researcher, so very much looking at endogenous DMT. Yeah, just, I mean, I don't know enough about it to really comment on. I know that the science isn't fully there yet, like we're talking about a lot of the time on this show so far. But the fact that he's found these the endogenous agonism of the sigma 1 receptor, basically, that's what he's really into.
That's interesting. Yeah, the sigma receptors are definitely super interesting. I know 5-MeO has a higher affinity as well than in DMT also, and that could possibly explain some of the kind of cascade of healing effects, physically throughout the body as well too.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something I kind of keep my eye on when I see new things pop up or new research. So cool. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that though, and yeah, I guess speaking about different receptor systems and whatnot, just wanted to talk a little bit about what's possible, circling back to AI, hyperhumanism, transhumanism, with novel drug design in the world of AI, and like what that can look like in the future of novel targeted compound research. You and I are both intimately familiar with an incredible compound called MXE, and that for me really showed me what is possible with targeted compound design, because as you know, MXE was developed very intentionally as an alternative to ketamine for a very specific reason, and then it turned out to do way more things, right? And so for me, I've yet to stumble across another compound that quite possesses the magic of MXE. It's no longer available, hasn't been since 2014. But yeah, it did open up a Pandora's box for me about what is actually possible when you're approaching drug design from this way. And then so couple that with AI and the understanding on new dimensions of the proteins and receptors and the 3D structures of everything that are going to allow us to create these highly targeted, highly selective compounds that have these, different antagonist, agonist profiles, and allow us to just really dive in on a deeper level. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts there, or like where that's heading, or any thoughts you want to share on MXE?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changed people's lives. It was something that was basically, like you say, invented specifically to help somebody that was a chemist, a guy called Kevin, who had lost an arm. Phantom limb syndrome kicked in, so the only way he could get rid of that pain was through ketamine, daily use of ketamine, which then started destroying his bladder. So he was like, well, can't I tweak the molecule to make something stronger? That means I need to take a lot less of it. And MXE was born in 2010. So, but yeah, it's for me, it's something that we're seeing a lot now. It's in the news. Ketamine therapy for depression. I think that ketamine's not the greatest choice because it's so short-lived. Doesn't have the afterglow that something like MXE would have. Also, what I loved about the MXC kind of style analogs is the stimulation. So the fact that you not only get the insight, so you get this kind of like complete, elimination of anxiety. You get this complete stimulation, pure stimulation to want to make things different, and you also then are disassociated. So you have like 3 drug actions in one. And that really makes it the perfect therapy drug, in my opinion, because you are able to sit in your backstage with 360-degree overview effect, so you can see all your lies, all the darkness, all the stuff you're lying to yourself about. But because the default mode network's turned right down, you don't have that annoying, everyday chatter going, you're a piece of shit. So you actually can sit in it and start metaprogramming, because you're not judging it. You're not going, oh, it's so horrible, I want to escape. You just sit in it, and and it's like a truth serum. You're really able to, okay, now I'm going to do less of this and more of this. And, if you look at blue light, which is a harm reduction site, and look at the big and dandies on MXC, so many people got off heroin, so many people got off cocaine, because they could see the overview effect, they could see how it was affecting their communities, their choice of drug. And this was just far superior as an experience because it didn't lead to, if you, this was the key, as always with everything, the dose is the poison, right? So if you do too much of it, it loses all of its potency in terms of, its afterglow and its real beneficial effects. So what I loved about America is that the church of MXC came around, right? So people would go and get their monthly sacrament, and I think that's actually the right way to take it. It shouldn't necessarily be legal. I think clinically administered or through a church, somewhere where you don't have access to it, because it is addictive, and I think that this needs to be acknowledged. And ketamine is very addictive, and unfortunately, a lot of people that are at their lowest ebb, or that really do not need another addiction, are ending up ketamine addicts because it gives you that temporary relief. But I think that some of these other analogs have a lot of potential because they can potentially last a lot longer, give you a longer afterglow, and that allow you to rebuild your life. But again, not having access to it is as crucial as having access to it. So it's a shame that it disappeared. I think that AI drug discovery, tailoring these things to avoid the addiction profile, to really, for people that desperately need it. I mean, I've had friends that have committed suicide that really shouldn't have done. They made that decision because they didn't have that emergency medicine to stop the spiraling looped thinking. A lot of it's about loop busting and getting rid of these preconceptions about your life that you feel trapped, and of course a lot of people are trapped, but I think having something that will just break you out of that very prismed perspective is a game changer for therapy.
Yeah, 100%. It's so funny you mentioned the church. It was called the Church of Neuroscience, and it was based nearby here, right in New Orleans, run by Dr. Jeremy Kerr. I was a good friend of his. He passed away, R.I.P. But yeah, I did. He was a brilliant guy, and the way that he did this, which by the way, this was way before psychedelic related churches were a thing or a trend. This was a very long time ago. He had been doing this. It's called K&B Organics, or the Church of Neuroscience, and brilliant guy. And the way that he put all of that together, and the way that he recognized MXC as exactly, the things that you described, and what was really special about that compound in particular, and why it opened up this Pandora's box for me and just my thinking of what's possible with targeted drug research is how versatile this substance was, right? Like if you try to take ketamine as a nootropic or microdose it and go about your day, it's not gonna work. Trust me, I've tried. It doesn't work. And so, but the thing about MXC is that in extremely low doses, it was by far the most potent nootropic I've ever consumed in my life. It like turned my brain into a quantum computer, and a day would feel like a year just because of how many thoughts I could complete in one day. And I mean, I felt like I could have written a book a day, honestly, if that was what I was directing my attention towards. I was directing towards, and also, it that particular compound, right? Like it shares these properties with ketamine, but it also has this very serotonergic side to it, and that's what's responsible for, I think, it kind of felt like a hybrid tryptamine dissociative in a lot of regards, and so yeah, it just also made me just absolutely love the process of learning rather than trying to get to a result, right? I feel like a lot of compounds that are more dopaminergic, you just like want to like do something and finish something, whereas that particular compound made me enjoy the process in a different way that allowed information to settle into my system in a brand new way. And so and then that's kind of the low dose end of the spectrum, and then moving up to like the higher doses, you can elicit that connection to the creator full state, right? All with this same compound with these different dosing profiles. And so yeah, I'm just really interested in seeing where the rest of this continues to unfold with similar compound research, and yeah, just because since we're on the thread of dissociatives, what interests me about dissociatives and kind of my working personal theory is that glutamate, which is our excitatory neurotransmitter, which NMDA antagonists like ketamine or methoxetamine, MXE, block the function of, seems to be this kind of electro tether of our consciousness to our nervous system, like to our spinal column. And it seems to be what keeps consciousness local to the body or bound to the body. And then so that when you block that off, right, when you electronically in that very specific way seem to block glutamate's action, you seem to untether yourself from the locality that is typically your body at baseline neurochemistry. And so I think, you and I were talking before, and it seems like kind of two different ways up that mountain that we were talking about before, right? And so you kind of have these, in my opinion, these kind of two polarities of compounds and mechanisms of action, right? Like you have the tryptamines and the other serotonergic psychedelics, and then you have the dissociatives, and they're both beneficial in their own ways, and they're both potentially harmful in their own ways. And in my viewpoint, the serotonergic psychedelics kind of approach the understanding gained through them as are through means of like sensory overload and attention to detail and feeling the living nature of all things that surround you and like connecting to the creator in that way, while I view the kind of, the full dissociative kind of breakthrough state as achieving a similar means through an opposite route, right? Like sensory shut off and like entering the void and merging with the logos in that way and understanding the nature of kind of like a panpsychism perspective is what those compounds elicit in me. And so and then you have like kind of hybrid functional compounds like MXE, where at lower doses it does this, but then you can still achieve that full breakthrough at the higher doses. Do you view tryptamines and dissociatives as a polarity, and how do you see them being integrated into some of these frameworks like the Cyberdelics and the Holotechnica?
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary insight there, and I think that a lot of the time, if you are to do a tryptamine after a dissociative, then you're actually protecting yourself, I would say. There seems to be some sort of neurotoxicity that results from doing dissociatives. But yeah, I think that, I mean, David Luke always makes me laugh because he'll go to a festival and he'll do, all the medicines, and then he'll finish it off with a 5-MeO DMT trip, and it's as good as new. So it's definitely something interesting there that's worthy of research, I think, to alleviate, some of the downsides. I think, it's very important to you take the antidote whenever you take anything that's not necessarily a natural substance. Be mindful of your level of anti-inflammatories going in, so that you protect your system, whether it's the bladder or whether it's the liver or whether it's whatever it is. Just be super mindful of dosage, of hydration, drinking your matcha. Make sure you have green tea with any dissociative. So there's various things that you can do that I think, again, it's all about education, and go in there with an intention. I think if you're going in to escape something, then you're not doing it right. You've got to go in there to reconnect or to reset, but not to just escape, because whatever you're escaping from is going to be right there when you come back.
Mm-hmm. You're the only other person I've ever known that talks about green tea with dissociatives. For those of you listening, EGCG is a powerful antioxidant that shows specific protection of bladder tissue when consuming cyclohexylamines and ketamine and things of that nature. So and it's an all-around antioxidant, so it's just great for you in other ways as well. But it's been used to treat ketamine-related bladder issues in recent years, as that's unfortunately kind of become a thing. But yeah, man, I agree with everything that you just said, and it reminds me of something else that I heard you say, which is any structure used to access the divine can become a crutch if not used skillfully. And that's also that statement is just as important as the question of where the whole transhumanism and or anything else that we've talked about is, right? Because it is super easy to get carried away, and I'm sure at some point all of us are guilty of it in some way or another, and just the ability to reel that back in is like really important. And then like kind of come back to the science as well, in this whole kind of context framework that's being built around like the new age movement per se, and then the kind of whole realm of marketing that's been applied as a top layer of all of that, and things can get twisted. So yeah, I think just kind of reapproaching, like you were saying, like with your own intention, and just always consuming more and more knowledge and not taking things at face value, and just like really thinking critically about how we're moving into this thing, instead of just like any form of just doing what you're told by someone other than your own discernment, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, we habituate to whatever. If it's
Yeah.
enlightenment, we habituate to that. So it's like, less you integrate, I think a lot of the time we're chasing our own tails, just constantly seeking out the next peak experience, not really integrating anything or learning anything from the last peak experience. And it's spiritual bypassing. It's like you've got to be. It's like when I go to Egypt, and I'm very privileged to be able to go to these sacred sites, to take my friends, and we're going to sites that not even the locals have been to see. So I think that it's that kind of thing. It's like, let's be mindful when we do DMTx that we don't colonize that realm as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we've created the technology. We're clever monkeys, right? We've created this technology that enable us to do this space flight, this internal space exploration. But the danger is that it's, sure enough, if it isn't just your own hierarchy, your own internal realm, if it is a parallel realm, what are we going to do to make sure that we're welcome on a regular basis? Because when I was doing DMTx at Imperial, or any of the DMT work, especially when I'm going back every 3 weeks, the message loud and clear was like, not you again. What are you doing back here? And again, it was like, we'll still do the work on you, but you don't need to come back as often as
Mm-hmm.
you. So that was like, whether that's me warning myself, or there is actually an annoyance at the amount of times that we enter these realms. And I think that they are sacred. And you hear of stories. I know there was somebody that was doing 5-MeO DMT like 8 times a day for 3 months, and then just killed themselves because they were so
Whoa.
convinced that that was the death realm that they were accessing, that they just figured they'd rather be there in the death realm. But that's a huge, huge risk,
Whoa.
a huge assumption. And so that's when I start to think more in a materialist way, and start to think, well, maybe this is a lot to do with my brain chemistry and what receptors are being hit and what's actually going on, rather than thinking I've got some godly perspective that means I can exit my sacred and divine human experience.
Right.
So I think that, yeah, let's not be jaded. Let's be mindful of our privilege. Let's, like, if we have the opportunity to trip and nobody else around us does, then maybe that's not great. So being an individual with enlightenment, and when everyone else around you doesn't have that privilege to even spend the time doing it, I think is a problem. So I think, do more volunteering, do more earthly stuff, do the washing up. Just don't spend all your time seeking. When you don't realize that you're here for 1,000 months and you've got this very mundane human job. The messiness of human life is sacred as well. I think it's all divine. So it's just a balance. Just make sure you balance stuff out, and that you spend enough time with your families, with your loved ones. All the basic stuff, which will become even more prevalent now that we've got AI. So hopefully that will mean a return to the family, a return to the body, a return to community, because so much of the cognitive stuff will just be done. It'll all be done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, man. That's a lot. Yeah, and I think it's really, really important. Also, that's why I really appreciate satire platforms that make light of all this shit.
yeah.
Like people like a good friend of mine, Brent Pella, who's a comedian, and even Instagram accounts like Healing from
Oh,
Healing
love him.
highlight some of the stuff that you know that page.
Of course, man.
Oh, it's
Adam,
so good.
I love him. I love him.
Yeah,
He's a hero.
it's so good. It real no, truly, like doing God's work. I think it's
Yeah.
so needed, and I think that it does help to prevent people from becoming jaded also, because it just helps make light of something that otherwise is very liable to cause those feelings. And yeah,
Exactly.
but I mean, everybody obviously is also just kind of on their own path of seeking, and that leads to their own very custom tailored incarnational journey and experience. And so But regardless of all else, what we can and should do is hope that we collectively kind of land on these same just realizations of just the importance of being able to check ourselves across this, and to just hold this new movement in a light that is mature and is going to lead to the collective empowerment of civilization rather than some of the alternatives there.
I think one way of looking at it is, is what you're doing now going to benefit the next 5 generations or the next 50 generations to come? Because if it isn't, if it's just benefiting you or your local whatever, then maybe you need to think bigger and broader.
Yeah.
Think, what can you do with your social media? Because it is a vehicle. Like with my Facebook, my Instagram, it's all about coming up with new ideas and then promoting them. Like, so I'll come up with an idea like context engineering, and then I'll create an image around context engineering to describe it visually, and then I'll put another image up, and then I'll create this literacy around context engineering. Then people start sending me examples of context engineering, and I'm like, and they're saying, is this context engineering? I'm like, yes, you've got it. And then I'll be invited to Japan to do a whole symposium on context engineering, even though it's just through social media that it's been manifested in the world. So using these platforms kind of against themselves, not putting a picture of your dinner on your, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
trying to think bigger than, it's like we did this amazing thing during the pandemic. It was called the Co-Reality Collective, where a lot of my creative friends had no more work, right? There was no space. So we used Zoom, and we had Zoom rooms for every creative. So there was one room with a hypnotist, one room with a pole dancer, one room with, and then we had these themes. So it was like, let's go into the human body, and each room was a different part of the human body. So you go into the heart to talk about like emotional stuff, or the womb to talk about baby stuff or whatever. And then, we got like 400 people coming to these parties, and it was all donation based. And then we made like $4,000 a party, and all that money would go to the creatives to just keep them sane and still creating. And then at one point we were like, well, why don't we just have the work? Because then we got picked up by Burning Man, and we were like, I was DJing to like 40,000 people in my bedroom on Zoom, because 2 years Burning Man was virtual, right? So, and then it was like, well, why don't we get everyone in the hot tub? So we had the world's largest distributed hot tub, because everyone was in their bath listening to some amazing music, right? And it was like, wow, this is
That's
what the
great.
internet's really for, right? This is
Yeah.
exactly what it's really for, not for what we've been misusing it for so long.
Man, no doubt. The hot tub, man, that's great. That's hilarious. That was for Burning Man.
That was for Burning Man, yeah.
Wow. Well, man, I think we covered a lot here before we bring this home. First of all, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I really love our conversations, and yeah, I want to give people first of all, an understanding that we're like barely scratching the surface of a rabbit hole that is as infinite as it is exciting. And so I want people to be able to take it further than this podcast and go explore some more of the stuff that you've published and some more of your work. So yeah, just let people know what's alive for you right now and where they can go find the rest of your stuff.
Yeah, so you can go to the Museum of Consciousness, which is themoc.org. You can go to Noonautics.org. You can go to Elusis Mind, which is the retreat that we're opening. And you can go to Psychedelic Nexus. You can also find me on Instagram as DJ Into Being, and Facebook as Behind the Beats. So yeah, I mean, in terms of we didn't touch on the retreat space, but what I'm really trying to bring is not just theorize around a lot of this stuff around Holotechnica and context engineering, but actually bring it into practice. So how do we create the perfect environment for doing psychedelic research when so much psychedelic research has been skewed by very bad contexts, right? So mostly hospital wings, and of course we associate those spaces with death and dying and disease. So to go tripping in those spaces where somebody may have died in the very bed that you now sit in to do your trip. So imagine a scenario where you're on in a beautiful setting, where you can go snorkeling on the barrier reef in the morning and have a lomi lomi massage for a couple of hours before doing DMTx, and we really want to open this space up not just for the elite, but also for for your average, researcher, for your average head who can get a scholarship to come out there. So I'm really interested in, a plug and play model for all those research institutes like Imperial, like King's, like the Beckley SciTech guys, or MAPS, or whoever it is that want to do human studies, that they can come and do that in a space that's optimized for transformation and inscendence, not just transcendence, but how do we go in, like we talked about this. This double consciousness is as much as about going in as it is about going up.
Yeah. Perfect, man. Yeah. Well, and we'll slap all your links too in the description. And man, Carl, thanks, dude. We covered a lot. It was a beautiful conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. And everybody definitely go check out all of his stuff. He's got a bunch of talks as well that are all just equally great. So yeah, bro, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure, man. Thank you.